Close your eyes for just a moment. Can you feel it beneath your feet? Not the steady hum of city life, not the comfort of solid ground, but something older, something the earth has not forgotten. A trembling, a rupture, a crack that split open not just the cobblestones of a southern city, but the silence that had been holding 20 years of grief in place. It was August 31st, 1886. The hour was just before 10 o'clock in the evening. Most of Charleston, South Carolina was already preparing for sleep, candles being blown out, rocking chairs stilling on front porches, the last of the summer heat settling into the old wood of homes that had stood since before the Revolution. And then, without warning, without mercy, without even the courtesy of a moment's hesitation, the earth moved. Stay with me, because what happened next was not simply a disaster, it was a reckoning. The ground beneath Charleston opened with a force so violent that church bells rang on their own, as if God himself was calling the city to attention. Brick walls that had survived cannonballs crumbled in seconds, iron columns twisted like wire, streets that had been walked by soldiers, by senators, by those who had been enslaved, by mothers carrying their children home from market. Those streets split apart as if the city itself could no longer hold together what lived inside it. 20 years had passed since the end of the Civil War. 20 years of uneasy reconstruction, of grudging treaties, of men who had tried to kill each other, now trying to share the same sidewalks, the same markets, the same city. The wounds had not healed. They had only been covered, bandaged beneath the surface with politics and propriety, and the polite fiction that the past was past. Charleston had been rebuilt after the war, but it had never truly been made whole. And then, on that August night, something older than human grudges decided it had heard enough. The earthquake that struck Charleston in 1886 was the most powerful seismic event ever recorded. On the east coast of the United States, it killed nearly 100 people. It damaged or destroyed more than 2,000 buildings. It left a city in ruins. But it did something else, to something the politicians and the peace treaties and the long, bitter years had failed to do. It forced the men who still carried the war inside their chests to put down what they were carrying and pick up something else entirely. Because when the ground falls away beneath your feet, you cannot afford the luxury of old hatred. When the walls come down around your neighbors, the neighbors you never spoke to, the neighbors you once fought against, the neighbors whose fathers fought yours in places whose names you still cannot say without flinching, you have two choices. You can stand still in the rubble and let the past bury you along with everything else, or you can reach out your hand. This is the story of the men who reached. If this resonates with you, if you believe that shared suffering might be the deepest form of human connection, stay with me. Because what Charleston built from the wreckage of 1886 was more than a city. It was a truth that no treaty had ever managed to put into words. Like this video if you believe history has something to teach us, and subscribe so you never miss a story worth remembering. To understand what the earthquake broke open, you first have to understand what Charleston was in 1886. Not the Charleston of tourist brochures, not the city of magnolias and church steeples and pastel-colored houses, though all of that was there too. The Charleston of 1886 was a city held together by tension, the kind of tension you can feel in a room where two people are pretending not to remember something terrible they once did. It was a city of visible scars and invisible wounds. The Civil War had ended 21 years before, but in Charleston, the war had not ended. It had simply changed shape. You could see it in the unspoken geography of who walked where and who looked away from whom. Former Confederate officers still carried themselves with the stiff pride of men who believed they had been right, even in defeat. Former Union soldiers stationed in the South had mostly gone home by now, but their memory lingered like smoke. And the men who had been enslaved were still living in the wreckage of a freedom the city was not ready to honor. Reconstruction had officially ended in 1877, and with its end came a slow, deliberate dismantling of the progress that had been made. The black men who had served in the state legislature were being pushed out. The schools built for their children were being underfunded. The laws were changing quietly, methodically, like a tide going back out, pulling away rights that had only just arrived. By 1886, Charleston was a city in the middle of forgetting, on purpose, what it had promised to remember. And yet, life went on. Merchants sold their wares on Market Street. Children chased each other through narrow alleyways. Women hung laundry in the backyards of homes that still bore the marks of wartime shelling, planting flowers in the cracked earth near broken foundations, as if beauty were an act of resistance. The city breathed. It ate. It argued. It prayed separately. in churches that did not share congregations. The veterans were everywhere. You could not walk a block without encountering a man whose body carried the memory of the war. A missing arm, a long scar, a walk permanently altered by a wound that never fully healed. The Confederate veterans were honored with monuments and a mythology that grew larger the further they got from the facts. The Union veterans, those who had stayed, was something the city preferred not to think about at all. Sometimes the silence between them was so thick you could almost hear it, a silence made of everything that could not be said. And underneath all of it, the ground was holding its breath. It would not hold it much longer. The stories we pass on are the ones that survive. Share this with someone who loves history. Close your eyes again. It is 10 minutes before 10 o'clock on the night of August 31st, 1886. The air smells of low tide and hot brick, that particular Charleston smell, salt and stone, and the ghost of summer days. Most of the city is quiet, and then a sound that no one who heard it ever forgot. Not a crash, not a bang, something deeper than that. Something that seemed to come from inside the earth itself, like the ground clearing its throat. The tremor that struck Charleston that night measured approximately 7.0 on the modern Richter scale. It was strong enough to be felt as far away as Cuba and as far north as New York City. Ships in the harbor were thrown against each other. The spire of St. Michael's Church cracked and swayed as if it were made of paper. Chimneys fell by the hundreds. Gas mains ruptured. And then, entire buildings simply collapsed into themselves. The first thing that survivors described was not the sound, and not even the destruction. It was the silence that came afterward. That terrible, absolute silence that follows a catastrophe before the screaming begins. And then the cry started. From beneath the rubble, from the streets, from the windows of buildings cracked open like eggs, people calling names. Names of children, names of parents, names of neighbors, names of people they had not spoken to in years, but now suddenly could not bear the thought of losing. The fire started almost immediately, gas lines broken by the quake igniting in the dark, and the aftershocks kept coming, wave after wave of smaller tremors that made rescue efforts nearly impossible. Men who had charged into cannon fire at Gettysburg pressed themselves against the ground in the open squares, unwilling to go back inside. The ground itself had become the enemy, and against that enemy, no one had a bayonet. By morning, the full scale of the disaster was becoming clear. 92 people were confirmed dead. Thousands more were injured. Thousands had been made homeless in a single night. They poured into the parks, dragging whatever they had managed to grab. A blanket, a photograph, a Bible, a child. They built makeshift shelters from boards and canvas. They slept on the ground, and in those improvised camps, something began to happen that no one had planned for. They began to talk to each other, not with the invisible armor of ideology and grievance, but as human beings. The way people talk in the dark, when they are frightened, and the only warmth available is another human being. A Confederate veteran shared his blanket with a family he did not know. A black church opened its doors to white families who had nowhere to go. A Union man offered his canteen to a man whose house had been his neighbor's for 2 decades, though they had never spoken. The earthquake had done in one night what 20 years of politics had failed to do. It had made them all equally small. Leave a comment below. Do you believe disaster can change people? Has a moment of crisis ever changed your own life? There is a phrase that came out of the weeks that followed the 1886 Charleston earthquake, not an official phrase or a newspaper editorial. It was something that passed from mouth to mouth among the men who lived through those days of clearing and rebuilding. The shovel replaced the bayonet. 6 words, and in those 6 words, an entire history. The work began almost immediately. There was no time for anything else. Charleston was a city of rubble, mountains of broken brick and splintered wood that blocked every major street and buried homes. The city government did its best, but governments move slowly, and rubble does not wait. So the men of Charleston, those who were still able to stand, picked up whatever tools they could find and went to work. And here is where the story becomes unique. The men who organized those work details, instinctively, did so by rank and experience. Former officers, Confederate and Union alike, found themselves giving orders in the same direction. Former soldiers found themselves taking those orders without stopping to ask which flag the officer had served under. Because the rubble did not care. The rubble needed to be moved, and the fastest way to move it was together. There are accounts from diaries and letters that describe moments of surreal collaboration. A human chain that stretched down a ruined street. A man who had fought at the Battle of Bull Run working alongside a man who had fought on the other side of that same battle. A black veteran of the United States colored troops, working alongside white Charlestonians who had once fought to preserve slavery. The shared language of logistics and structural assessment became a bridge across divisions that political language had never managed to span. It was not comfortable. It was not healed. The earthquake did not erase the history of what those men had done to each other. Diaries are full of the complexity, the discomfort, the silences. When a man would find himself face to face with someone he had reason to hate, some choices were small acts of grace. Some were simply the pragmatic recognition that the work needed to be done. But even pragmatism, when it is consistent enough, begins to look like something, begins to feel like something. Close your eyes one more time. Can you see them? In the grey morning light, in the dust that hung over the city like a second sky, the sound of shovels against brick, the grunt of effort, the occasional quiet word of direction or warning. The shovel replaced the bayonet, not because the hatred was gone, but because the rubble was real, and so was the hunger, and so were the children waiting to go home. And sometimes necessity teaches us what principle alone cannot. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. History's most powerful lessons are the ones we carry forward together. In the weeks that followed the earthquake, Charleston built something that no architect had designed and no city planner had approved. It built, in the open squares and makeshift camps and community kitchens, a temporary city within the ruined one. And in that temporary city, the rules were different. They had to be. There was not enough of anything: food, shelter, medicine, or the social distance people used to avoid each other's presence. So people got close, uncomfortably close. And in that closeness, things happened. The community kitchens were perhaps the most extraordinary of these spaces. Women who had never cooked for anyone outside their households found themselves feeding hundreds of people a day. A woman who had been born into a planter family, serving stew to a black family who had lost their home. An Irish immigrant woman ladling out portions with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood what it meant to have too little. The earthquake had created a temporary commons, a shared table at which the usual seating arrangements did not apply. The veterans ate together in these spaces, not always at the same tables. Old habits did not dissolve overnight, but they ate in the same rooms. They heard each other's voices. They watched each other's faces when the aftershocks came. And the aftershocks kept coming, for weeks, each one sending a fresh wave of fear through the camps. And fear, it turns out, is one of the great equalizers. A man in the grip of real, physical terror looks very much like any other man in the grip of terror. The rank and the history and the ideology, they all go quiet when the ground starts moving again. The reconstruction itself took years. Charleston was rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, with money from the city and private donations. Northern cities sent aid. The federal government eventually provided funds. Black and white Charlestonians contributed to the rebuilding of each other's institutions. Black churches were repaired with lumber donated by white merchants who found proximity to shared suffering had changed their arithmetic. Small things, but small things are how large changes begin. The new buildings that rose from the rubble were different from the old ones, not just architecturally. They incorporated earthquake bolts and improved foundations that the disaster had made necessary. They were different because they had been built by men who had stood in the same dust together. Hands that laid foundations had also passed bricks to each other across lines that had previously seemed permanent. The buildings of post-earthquake Charleston were not monuments to reconciliation. The city was far too human for that. But they were monuments to something, to the fact that even the most fractured community can find a way to stand up. Stay with me, because the most important part of this story is not the earthquake, and it is not even the rebuilding. The most important part is the question it leaves us with. A question the veterans of 1886 had to answer. When everything that divided you is buried under everything that has fallen on both of you equally, what do you reach for first? If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell us what you think it means for our own time. Every great conversation in the comments starts with one brave voice. History is rarely clean. The people who want it to be clean, who want the earthquake of 1886 to be a simple story of enemies made friends, of a city healed by shared suffering. Those people are looking for comfort in a place where the truth is more complicated and, in the end, more interesting. Because Charleston after 1886 was not a city transformed, it was a city that had glimpsed something. And what it did with that glimpse tells us something profound about what human beings are capable of. Both the reach toward each other and the retreat, The cooperation that emerged in the rubble did not survive unchanged into the years that followed. The Jim Crow laws that were already being written when the earthquake struck continued to be written afterward. The political machinery of racial exclusion continued to turn. The men who had passed bricks to each other in the dust of August 1886 went back to their separate lives, their separate churches, their separate futures. The truce that the earthquake had imposed was real, but it was also temporary in all the ways that enforced truces are temporary. When the urgency passed, the old distances reasserted themselves, as they always do, as they have always done. And yet, there were things that did not go back, stories that were told, connections that had been made that could not be entirely unmade. A veteran who had worked alongside a man he had been taught to hate, and had found that the man was a man, tired, frightened, capable of effort, capable of grief, capable of handing you a water jug when your hands were too dusty to find your own. That knowledge, once acquired, is very hard to unknow. It does not always change behavior, but it changes something small and deep that does not announce itself but is there, in the gap between what a person believes and what a person does. The earthquake bolts the long iron rods driven through the walls of Charleston's damaged buildings to hold them together, their ends visible on the outside as the letter S or XB became one of the enduring symbols of post-earthquake Charleston. You can still see them on the old buildings today. They are called earthquake bolts, or sometimes, simply, the bolts that hold the city together. Locals will tell you that Charleston is a city literally held together by its catastrophes, that the cracks in the old walls are not weaknesses, but evidence of survival, evidence that something broke and was put back together, not perfectly, but held. This is what the veterans of 1886 left behind, not a myth of reconciliation, not a story of enemies made brothers, but something more honest than that. A demonstration that even men who carried the weight of conflict could find a way to work toward the same thing, not because they had forgotten, not because they had forgiven, but because the rubble was real, and the work was real. And sometimes the reality of the present is more powerful than the weight of the past. Close your eyes one final time. Can you feel it? Not the tremor now, but what came after? The slow, imperfect, human work of putting something back together. The sound of a shovel striking brick in the early morning, the smell of dust and wood smoke, and the salt air coming in off the harbor, the sight of two men working in silence, side by side, because the city needed them too. This was another episode of Life in 19th Century America. Real life. I am keeping the flame of the past alive, one story at a time, because every memory is a lesson, and every lesson, if we are brave enough to carry, it becomes a legacy. Thank you for staying with me. Subscribe so you never miss a story from the America we remember. And if this episode moved, you'll share it. Until the next episode,